The nerve to sit right in front of me and to be playing with this. You're out with your family today. If you have work to do, we'll put you on the bus, send you back to Glenview, okay? Glad to have you with us, folks. Anyhow, my name is Ed. I'm going to be your tour guide. We're going to be spending the next 90 minutes cruising on the main branch and the south and north branches of the Chicago River. We're going to do several things. Number one, I've asked Captain Carolyn to try to keep us in the sun as much as possible. Number two, this is an architectural cruise, so we're going to talk about architecture. Chicago is one of the most important cities in the world for architecture. This is the city where tall buildings that we call skyscrapers were born, way back in the 1880s. A man by the name of William La Baronne Jenny. He had been a major in the Union Army in the American Civil War, an engineer. He came to Chicago and he erected what was considered to be a revolutionary tall building, 10 stories high. Not so tall today. But that building had a steel and iron frame, very important, because steel and iron frame buildings would come to replace stone and masonry as your basic material in building construction. And he took advantage of technology. He put an elevator into that building. That's the simplest definition of a skyscraper. We're also going to talk a little bit about Chicago history. As I went around here and asked people where they were from, we have people here from a wide variety of places. We have folks here from Germany. We have folks here from Spain. We have folks here from Glenview. That's a suburb just north of the city of Chicago. We've got California here, Arizona, and you folks are from Cleveland, Ohio, the home of the Cleveland Browns, the Dog Pound, Cleveland Indians. All right, the Cavaliers with that wonderful player, Mr. LeBron. We're glad to have you here. Anyhow, many of you come from cities that are much older than the city of Chicago. You're in a baby of a city. We become a city in the year 1837 with all of about 3,000 people here. We're just a little larger today, folks. Currently, you are in the third largest city in the United States. By 2020, when the next time we count heads, if we have a census, we may slip to number 4. That upstart, Houston, Texas, may surpass us, but we'll see. Anyhow, this building on your immediate right with all of these balconies and all this glass and the common brick, this was a warehouse building erected between 1905 and 1920 by an architect named Christian Pugh. The building was actually twice as long as it is today. So this was a warehouse district where we are located currently. That has all changed. This area known as Streeterville, high-rise buildings, a lot of good restaurants, jazz clubs, artist studios, and much more. On your left, those are $1.5 million to $2 million townhomes built in the 1990s by an architectural firm, Booth Hanson. Now, if you notice, on top of those buildings are those little gray structures with curved roofs. So think of this. You spend $1.5 million to maybe more for a townhome. You don't have enough room to put away your lawnmower, your lawn chairs. We do have lawn chairs here. They're just not out at this time of the year. Or your snow blower. So you have to have a storage shed. It was also the architect's way of paying homage or respect to the fact that this was a warehouse district. Now notice those white plywood boards over there on your right, and those scraggly trees, a few evergreens. We had plans to erect the tallest all-residential structure in the world, 2,100 feet high, over 700 meters high. It would be shaped like a twisted drill bit. It was be called the Spire. The architect from Spain, hey Toledo, pay attention. The architect from Spain, Santiago Calatrava. That could be on the test later. I just gave you an answer. Problem was the money was being put up by an Irish consortium. The Irish economy is the fastest growing economy in Europe currently. They've had their problems the last 20 years, so they ran out of money. Project is on hold. Anybody here come up with several $1 million to get a us started again, we'll name the building after you. Okay, first building I'd like to bring to your attention is on your left. It's a 60-story high tower with a rounded structure on top, built in the 1960s by two architects named Schippereit and Heydrich. They were students of a very famous German-born architect by the name of Mies van der Rohe. Now the building is curved. Every unit in that building has a view of Lake Michigan or the river. Narrow, brown tinted steel, dark windows, and at the very top, that round structure. Proper name of that building, the Lake Point Tower. But because of its shape, we call it the Whiskey Flask Building. And that round structure on top, that is the cork on the whiskey flask. It is actually a restaurant français, French restaurant, seal blue, tray share, very expensive. 3 credit cards may take you through a little petit déjeuner, a little brunch, if the only thing you have to drink, agua fresca from Lake Michigan. Sans vin, sans le beer, sans le champagne. No beer, no wine, no champagne. Oprah Winfrey had a unit in that building. So did a former Chicago Cub baseball player by the name of Sammy Sosa. A lot of people who come here to work in movies, such as those being filmed here right now, Empire, Chicago PD, Chicago Fire, Chicago Med, rent apartments in that particular building. Out to your left, folks, through those concrete walls and the box that would take us out to Lake Michigan, that's Lake Michigan. Now this will be on the test also. There are 5 Great Lakes. Only one of the 5 is 100% inside the United States, Lake Michigan. All the rest we share with our great neighbor to the north, the country of Canada. By the way, that's where we get our drinking water. We have tremendous water here in Chicago. Okay, Captain Carolyn is now heading us west up the main branch of the river. We'll be going underneath the first of 4 double-deck bridges. This one is called the Lakeshore Drive or Franklin Delano Roosevelt Bridge. So called because FDR came here to dedicate this bridge in the late 1930s. He gave what became a very famous speech here, at least it was when I was in school. It was called Quarantine the Aggressors. He talked about the changing nature of the world of the late 1930s, the rise of Nazism and fascism in Western Europe, Japanese expansion in Asia and the South Pacific. He said, although we were in an isolationist frame of mind, we may have to get involved in world affairs. He was right. Okay, the water's about 30 to 40 feet deep here, a couple hundred feet from one bank to the other. And I'm going to work your left-hand side first. We'll cover the right-hand side on the way back. This area coming up on our left is known as Lakeshore Drive East. There's several thousand people that live in this area. 40 years ago, these were railroad storage yards out here for the Illinois Central Railroad. Then we had a 9-hole municipal golf course. Then developers took it over, put up some high-rise buildings, and now it's home to several thousand people and people who work in this area. Okay, you see a tall building going up, has that yellow netting at the very top. My words are blowing back into my mouth. Anyhow, this building is designed by a very famous architect, a Chicagoan, a woman named Jean Kang, one of the outstanding architects of the late 20th and 21st century. It'll be 90-some stories high. By the way, this river never freezes over in the winter. Too much current and too much barge traffic. And there are fish in this river. I wouldn't even touch them, forget about eating. But it's cleaner than it's been in years and years. Now, coming up next on your left, you see a clear glass building sort of facing us on an angle. That is the Swiss Hotel in the city of Chicago. The architect is now deceased. but his name was Harry Weiss Jr. Harry was fascinated with triangles. Harry was also a sailor. He always tried to get his clients to let him work sailing themes into his buildings. So what appears to be a rectangular glass wall, when we glide by it, will turn into a triangle, like sails on a sailboat. That design means that 80% of the rooms in the Swiss hotel have views of the Chicago River or of Lake Michigan. Only about 20% look into someone's room other than your own. Now, directly behind it, you see a tall building with curved concrete balconies. That is the Radisson Aqua Blue. It is a hotel, condominiums, and apartments. The architect, Jeannie Gang, is putting up that 90-some story building. What's so fascinating about this building, first of all, it is currently the tallest building in the world, designed by an architect who happens to be a female. Secondly, every one of those concrete balconies is different in size. She used CAD/CAM, computer-assisted design, in their development. One of my favorites, Jeannie Gang. Now, the building right in front of it is a rectangular building, dark steel and iron, narrow, dark tinted windows. That's an example of a style we call international modernism. And we associate that style with a German-born architect by the name of Ludwig Mies van der Rohe. Mies van der Rohe was the last head of the Bauhaus School of Art and Design in Berlin, Germany. When the Nazis took over, they closed his school. He's unemployed for 5 years. He came to Chicago and became the head of the Illinois Institute of Technology Department of Architecture. He developed that style, which he called less is more, and he trained hundreds of world-famous architects. And that is the prototype for tall buildings all over the world from the 1960s to the present day. Coming up next on our left are two postmodern brown buildings with narrow brown vertical windows coming down. That is the Hyatt Regency on Wacker. That hotel, designed by A. Epstein and Sons, the one on the left, 1974, the building on the right, 1980, has more sleeping rooms than any hotel in the city of Chicago. But maybe more important for some of you, it has the longest bar of any hotel in the city of Chicago, with a not very original name, Long Bar. Okay, some of you have been looking at this tall, graceful glass building with a single stack on top directly in front of our boat. That is the tallest building in Chicago, 1,454 feet high, 446 meters high. The architect is Adrian Smith. It's 92 stories high. That is Trump Tower in the city of Chicago. We'll say more about the building later. Coming up next on our left is a narrow gray building with long verticals, indentation, decoration at the top and the bottom. 1920s. That is Halliburton and Roach, and the architects are Halliburton and Roach, and that is called Art Deco. Art Deco, very popular 1915 to 1930. Art Deco is a French term, never very popular in France. Go figure that one out. We're going under the Michigan Avenue or Jean-Baptiste Point du Sable Bridge. Mr. Dusab was the first non-native permanent resident of Chicago. He was a gentleman of French, African, and Haitian descent. Next on our left, the London House Hotel today, originally the London Guarantee Insurance Building. This is a Beaux-Art building, an attempt to recapture the architectural flavor of ancient Rome and Greece. 1924, the architect Alfred Altschuler. Today it's a hotel with a very nice cocktail lounge up on the roof. That is a two-tone roadway on our left there called Wacker Drive, built in the 1920s, first double-deck roadway in the United States. And to make it more interesting, friends, it goes in all four directions. And many of the chase scenes in movies like The Dark Knight filmed on the lower level of Wacker Drive. There's a very narrow white terracotta building to your left. with what looks like it has a rocket ship on top. That was built in the late 1920s. It was called the Mather Tower, tallest building in Chicago for 6 years. Today it's the Club Quarters Hotel. The next building on your left, the most modern building with those white horizontals and glass windows. At the very top, it says Wyndham. It's a Wyndham Hotel. But on top of that is a penthouse apartment. That was the home to Bruce Wayne in The Dark Knight and the Batman movies. Chicago was Hollywood before there was a Hollywood. We had Charlie Chaplin, Lillian Gish, Roman Navarro, Tom Mix, and his horse Tony. Then they said mucho frio, too cold here a couple months of the year. So they moved out to those empty orange groves where Los Angeles is today. Now they come here to film interiors and exteriors. That building on your left, which has that rounded temple at the top, two shorter temples, called the Jewelers Building, 1927. That building actually had an elevator for automobiles. Drove your car into the building, elevator took you up to whatever floor you wanted to go to. It minimized the chances of a jewelry salesman being relieved of his gems involuntarily, or someone with a lot of bling experiencing the same. Now, those little igloo-like devices and that whole area where you see no one now and it says City Winery, that's part of the Riverwalk in the city of Chicago. The architect, Carol Ross Barney. The building behind it, that two-tone gray building with the two flags, the architect John Dinkerloo of Dublin, Ireland. In that building is the Leo Burnett Advertising Agency. Snap, Crackle, and Pop for Rice Krispies developed in that building. The Pillsbury Doughboy, Skippy Peanut Butter, the Green Giant, and much more. The Marlboro Man came out of that building. Next on your left, a tall, narrow, white granite building with delicate fluting in the windows, culminating in a triangle at the top, a modern-day Greek or Roman temple. The architect from Catalonia in Spain, Ricardo Bofill. Got a man back there with his wife from Toledo. I'm giving him a lot of publicity. Okay. Now, several of you said to me, Ed, this looks like a very nice city. If it ever gets warmer here, we might consider renting a unit, an apartment. Do you have any suggestions? And they told me money is no object. Okay. On your left, folks, building that's about 3 years old, this glass building like BLK Architects. 3-bedroom, 2-bath, $7,000 a month. But you can have 2 dogs of any size in your unit. Highly unusual for a high-rise in Chicago. The next building on your left is an example of Art Deco. The LaSalle Wacker Building, 1930. Art Deco is sometimes described as a giant armchair. So you rest your back in that tall center part. Rest your arms in the shorter part, to the left and the right. Coming up in front of us is the third of our 4 double-deck bridges. This one is known as the Wells Street Bridge. The upper level of this bridge, however, is not for automobiles, not for trucks, and not for pedestrians. It's for the Chicago elevated trains. Now, we don't use the word elevated in Chicago. We simply say L, E-L. If you use the word elevated, people will think you're aliens from another orbit, like Alf. You'll be charged double or triple wherever you go. So remember, just L. And the L happens to make an oval around our central city, so we call the central city the Loop, L-O-O-P. The bridges we're going under all go back to the 1880s and 1890s, and they're panoramic bridges in the City of Light, Paris, France. The L itself started in the 1890s. Next on your left, tall granite building with a Roman arch in the center. It's one of 4 buildings on the Chicago River by a New York City architectural firm, Cohn, Pedersen, and Fox. That Roman arch in the center of that building, the architect's way of paying respect to the fact that Chicago was the busiest domestic water port in the United States from 1850 until 1940. This is the railroad capital of the United States. because of our central location, and our O'Hare International Airport is the second busiest airport in the United States, exceeded only by Hartsfield International in the Atlanta, Georgia area. Now, the same architectural firm, Cohn Pedersen Fox, put up my favorite building on the river on your left, 333 West Wacker Drive. Over 450 feet of curved green glass, 2 shades of green to reflect the algae bottom of the Chicago River here. Towards the base of the building, there's green marble and gray granite, cut in ways to resemble decking on a large ship. There are no windows at the bottom. Why? Because when the L comes across the Lake Street Bridge that we'll be going under shortly, it makes a lot of noise. And the developers felt they could not lease out the lower levels at the high rents they wanted to charge. So they put the heating, ventilating, and air conditioning. Everyone has their favorite building. That's mine. There's a French expression, solid ground in this area is about 120 feet down. So before you can build up, you have to sink shafts down to bedrock, pour in your caissons, then concrete, and build up from the bottom. The building sits above several sets of railroad tracks, so this became a very challenging architectural and engineering feat. Underneath one of the 26 bridges on the Chicago River that we can go under. But the building on your right here, 2 North Riverside Plaza, built in the 1920s, was influenced by Howard Carter's discovery of King Tut's tomb in Egypt. The center of the building should be thought of as the chest or the thorax on the Great Sphinx. The lower parts, where it says 2 North Riverside Plaza, the clocks and that, those are the paws on the Great Sphinx. The Great Sphinx, of course, located in a suburb of Cairo, Egypt, called Giza, actually used by Napoleon Bonaparte's troops for target practice in the Napoleonic Wars. We're going underneath the Opera Bridge. I'll sing for you later. If you turn your head sharply to the right and look straight up, you'll see what looks like a glass waterfall coming down. That is the Ogilvy Center, an office building and a commuter rail station. The architect, a native of Nuremberg, Germany, by the name of Helmut Jahn. Helmut has lived in Chicago for over 60 years. Now, the next series of buildings here on your right are all called Gateway Center 1 through 4. They're all international, modern in style. In other words, rectangular, black steel and iron, dark tinted windows, no external decoration. They all show the influence of Mies van der Rohe. But these were done by his chief disciples, a firm called Skidmore, Owings and Merrill, or SOM. In fact, people who don't care for this architectural style say that Skidmore, Owings and Merrill followed Mies so closely that they should be called 3 blind Mies. The buildings are of interest to us because they sit over railroad tracks. We're approaching Chicago's Union Station. Captain Carolyn hasn't figured out yet how to maneuver our boat over there, but you can see the top of Union Station. To your right, that gray neoclassical building opened up in 1925 after 9 years of construction at a cost then of $75 million. This is where Amtrak, the only intercity passenger train service in the United States, comes into Chicago. At one time, we had 6 major train depots, but the railroads began giving up passenger service in the 1960s. It had not been profitable since they ferried troops to either coast for World War II and then the Korean conflict. So one by one our train stations have closed up. Union Station remains. If you have the opportunity to go into Union Station, it's quite interesting. There is a skylight in the main hall. It's about 150 feet in the air, 300 feet long. It was painted black following the attack on Pearl Harbor, December 7th, 1941, to deter potential terrorism. The black paint was removed in the 1990s. I guess we felt it was safe to do it by that time. We have filmed a lot of movies in our Union Station. Sir Alfred Hitchcock's North by Northwest, Silver Streak, The Fugitive, and many, many more. Okay, the sun has come out again. Feels good, doesn't it? Excellent. Coming up here on our right is a very interesting Art Deco building that opened up in 1933. It's undergoing renovation today. This building on our right was Chicago's main post office. In fact, it was the world's largest central post office from 1933 when it opened up until the 1990s when it was closed, about 1994, 95. By the way, if you like to do windows, ladies and gentlemen, the building has 2,404 windows. You need a lifetime supply of Windex, I'll tell you that. Now, this building where that blue netting is, there is actually a federal interstate highway that goes right through the middle of that building. It is called Interstate 290, or the Eisenhower Expressway, named for former President Dwight David Eisenhower, the man who instituted the interstate highway system. The building was purchased several years ago by a group called the 601 Corporation, and it will be turned into a first-class office building, probably having as many as 12,000 employees in that building. It's just good to see the sun. Forget about the temperature. We've been living in the gray here. Been the longest spring. Well, spring hasn't come. Okay, so what do we do for a main post office building now? It'll be coming up on our right. By the way, does anyone have to be anywhere in the next 3 weeks? Good. I'll talk to Carolyn. If we stay on this river, this will go into the Illinois River, into the mighty Mississippi River. In 3 weeks, we could be down in New Orleans. Let the good times roll. We only spent 3 days in New Orleans. Your liver can't take it anymore. Too much rich living. It's a great city. Okay, this is our newest central post office. It's called the Cardis Collins Building. The architects Lester B. Knight and Associates. The building has not met with critical approval. The most we say about it, it has great horizontal lines. Bingo. Kind of dull and not inspiring. Chicagoans demand more of their architects. So let's give you some more. First of all, this is not strip mining going on your left. But you come back in a couple of years, this will be filled with high-rise buildings, townhomes, some commercial activity. But coming up on your left is a building that we call River City. The architect was a man named Bertrand Goldberg. Mr. Goldberg was a student of Mies van der Rohe in Germany. Goldberg came to Chicago before Mies did. When Mies comes to Chicago, Goldberg takes him in. They become partners for several years, and then they have serious philosophical differences, quit, separate, and they become competitors for the rest of their lives. Mies van der Rohe was right angles and steel. Goldberg said, I draw my inspiration from nature. In nature, I don't see right angles. I see curves, circles, orbs, and arcs. And my dear master, I don't like working in steel and iron. I prefer pre-stressed concrete. Great. This was one of 4 projected buildings. Only one was ever built. Mr. Goldberg took sick, and the economy took sick. The shape of those windows, we call them the eyebrows on the south branch of the Chicago River. On the very first floor of this building, above those American flags, is a daycare center. The building also has a doctor's office, dentist's office, a podiatrist in case your feet hurt, a little drugstore, and a shoe repair shop. So I've often wanted to go there and talk to the shoe repair proprietors. Now you could purchase a 2-bedroom, 2-bath in this building, about 1,800 square feet, for less than $250,000. That's like free. It's like stealing. When we go up on the north branch of the river, the same square footage, 1.5 million in height. What's the difference? Location, location, location. The building in its earliest years in the 1980s had some severe flooding and electrical problems. They've all been solved, but once you get a reputation, it's hard to shake. Okay, let's shift gears and look to our right. Where that DSW sign is, it said Marshall Shoes. In that area is where Chicago's first urban renewal program began without any federal assistance. It's called the Great Chicago Fire, October 8th, 1871. This was a city of 300,000 people. It was a city that had no building codes. We had very few stone buildings or brick buildings. This is a wooden city. And that area was inhabited by recent immigrants from Ireland and Germany. We'd only had about 1.5 inches of rain from May 1st to Sunday night, October the 8th. On that night, a 50-mile-an-hour wind was blowing from my left to my right. The story is that at 9 o'clock at night, an Irish immigrant woman by the name of Catherine O'Leary went out to milk her cow. Is there anybody here that's ever milked a cow? Would you do it at 9 o'clock, folks? No, of course not. So the story probably isn't true. But we don't know what really started the Chicago fire, and it's a darn good story. So we continue to tell it. So the story is that Mrs. O'Leary went out with her lantern, put it in the straw, grabbed a certain part of Daisy's anatomy. Daisy objected, kicked over the lantern broke. The wind was blowing, and within 2 hours, logs are flying across this river. And all of the center of Chicago and the near north side up to Lincoln Park would burn to the ground. In a city of 300,000 people, 100,000 would be left homeless. 65% of all the buildings in Chicago were destroyed. But Chicago would rise like a phoenix from the ashes. In 1870, as I said, about 300,000 people here. 1900, 1,000,001. We were the fastest growing city in the world for those 30 years. That would soon end. With that kind of rapid growth comes a lot of challenges as well as opportunities. Okay. We're now heading north on the south branch of the river. If we had continued down that river for about another mile or so, we would have come to the third largest Chinese-American community in the United States. The only larger ones, New York City and San Francisco. And guess what we call our community now? Chinatown. Not very original. You didn't think you'd be called a device on the 4th of April, did you? I didn't either. Okay. Then directly across from Chinatown is a community called Pilsen, Pilsen. It was settled originally by people from what is today the Czech Republic. But today that's one of our largest Mexican-American communities in Chicago. Population of Chicago is currently about 2.9 million. 1 million are Caucasians, 1 million African Americans, about 800,000 people with Hispanic last names, primarily from Mexico, the American Southwest, Texas, Arizona, and from Puerto Rico. We have 117 different ethnic groups in the city of Chicago. At one time, this city had more people of Polish descent than any city in the world except for Warsaw, Poland. At one time, this was the third largest Jewish city in the world. And I could go on, but let's see what's coming up. On your right, at about 1 o'clock high, there's a building with a triangular-shaped roof, and there is a 32-foot high statue on top. That building is the Chicago Board of Trade, founded in the 1840s. that building was completed around 1930. The architects Hollebourg and Root. That 32-foot high statue is Ceres, C-E-R-E-S, the Roman goddess of grain and fertility. Perfect choice for the Board of Trade. When that building was completed in 1930, the architect said, never be taller in Chicago. 42 stories high. Guess what? It barely makes the top 100 in Chicago today. Board of Trade. Okay. Then, coming up in front of us, there are two tall buildings. The shorter one has those 3 glass turrets on top. That is 300 South Wacker. That is architect Cohn, Pedersen, and Fox. That is the tallest building in the world without a named tenant. It's known by its address. So if you're here to celebrate a special occasion, wedding, anniversary, whatever, want to have something named for you, go talk to the building's owners. We call it the Wedding Cake Building. Those 3 glass turrets on top, the tall one in the center, should be thought of as your engagement ring. The shorter turrets on either side, the little baguette stones that frequently flank an engagement ring. Those turrets light up at night. 1,000 fluorescent bulbs. And they flash the colors of our winning sports teams. So, what that meant in 2016, an awful lot of flashing for those Chicago Cubs. There hasn't been too much flashing for the Chicago White Sox the last couple of years. And for the Bears, we don't even want to talk about it. They haven't been in the playoffs in about 10 years. They won 3 games last year. We think if they win 5 this year, it'll be a successful year. So we don't. And our Blackhawks didn't even make the playoffs this year. So they save on electricity. But now, let's look at the tall black building with the white antennas on top. That is the Willis, used to be the Sears Tower. Opened up in 1974. It's 1,454 feet high. Then add another 300 feet for those white television antennas. So 446 meters high, plus another 100 feet high. When that building opened up in 1995, that was the tallest structure in the world. It would be for 21 years. Then those folks in Malaysia had to screw it all up, put up a taller building. We're now number 17 in the world, they're number 8. There's so many tall buildings going up in the world, we don't even know if we'll be in the top 25 in another 10 years or so. Tallest buildings in the world today in the Middle East or in Asia. So get your cell phone ready, get your camera ready. You're going to look to your right. I'm going to give you 2 shots to take photos. This building that we're going by has a mosaic of the river streets that intersect. And now coming up the 102-story high Willis or Sears Tower. The architects, there you go. Skidmore, Owings and Merrill. A little slow, get set. Skidmore, Owings and Merrill. Bruce Graham, chief architect. The engineer was the key man, Dr. Foster, structural engineer. So, look to your right. You don't have to look left, you don't have to look right, just look straight up. When we get to the opening between these 2 buildings. There you go, Willis or Sears Tower. Now, towards the very top of the legends. The elevator takes you up in about 70 seconds. Then you walk out on those ledges. They say on a clear day you can see 6 states from there. I've never seen anybody holding up signs, welcome to Iowa, welcome to Indiana, or anything like that. And if you go up there, when you do exit the building, you will leave not through 1, not through 2, but through 3 souvenir shops. That's the way all these buildings are today. They didn't want to take any chances. By the way, you notice our bridge was open in the middle? Our bridges are called bascule, B-A-S-C-U-L-E. That is a French word that means seesaw or teeter-totter. Okay, let's see what we have coming up here. On our right, you have this red granite building with serrated edges like a bread knife at home. That is the Chicago Mercantile Exchange Building, opened up in 1986. The architects Fujikawa and Johnson. Now, I don't know what anybody here does, but some of you must work in the private sector. Not everybody can be a public employee, okay? If you work in the private sector, you have a couple goals. Number one, make as much money as you legally can. Nothing wrong with that. Number two, you want a corner office. Power, prestige, authority, all sorts of psychological manifestations associated with the corner office. If the building is rectangular shaped, you can only have one office in each corner, 4 on each floor. By serrating the edges like this building does, you can have 4 in each corner, 16 on each floor. Think of all the egos you can take care of. Reduce stress, envy, put more emphasis on we rather than me. Neat idea. Okay, we're coming up to the Opera Bridge, which must mean we're near the Opera House in the city of Chicago, one of Mr. Ed's favorite buildings. Opened up in 1929. The architects Graham, Anderson, Probst, and White. It's an Art Deco building. The building opened up 1 week after the stock market crashed in 1929. Not a good time to open an opera house or anything else. The opening night opera, Giuseppe Verdi's Aida. Our resident diva, beautiful red-haired soprano that I'm mad about. She doesn't even know I exist. Her name is Renee Fleming. We seat 3,800 people for Grand Opera. There's only one opera house in the world that has a larger seating capacity, New York's Metropolitan Opera. And the Opera House itself is surrounded by an office building. A lot of lawyers, accountants, public relations types, foundations like to office in that building. This big empty lot here, we're going to be putting up a 54-story high tower. The primary tenant will be the Bank of America. We're going to be crossing the main branch of the river shortly and heading up the north branch of the river. But before we do that, there is a red brick building here, erected in 1912. It's called the Great Lakes Building. It's 6 stories high. It's of no architectural significance, really. But in the year 1860, the Republican political party held their second national nominating convention here in Chicago. On the site of this red brick building is where the party picked Abraham Lincoln as their presidential candidate. Now, he wasn't there in person. He got a text message informing him of his selection. Actually, Kennedys didn't show up until the 1920s. I think Al Smith, the governor of New York, was the first presidential nominee to show up in person at the national convention. Okay, we're crossing the main branch of the river. On your right is a massive, massive building called the Merchandise Mart or 1871 Center in Chicago. It opened up in 1930 at a cost of $34.5 million. We'll have more to say about that on our way back. But then you'll notice where that huge construction crane is, and it says Wolf Point West. And directly in front of us is a very tall, sleek, beautiful apartment building. All of that land, including where the apartment building is owned by a family whose name you may be familiar with. Kennedy, like in Joe Kennedy, Rose Kennedy, John, Bob, Ted, and so on. They're putting up 2 tall office buildings and this high-rise apartment building, which opened up about 18 months ago. The architect, a gentleman named Cesar Pelli. Mr. Pelli is a native of northern Argentina, and he was the former dean of the College of Architecture at Yale University in New Haven, Connecticut. You get a 2-bedroom here for about $2,500 to $3,000 a month. But the neat thing is they have a resident veterinarian. So if you have a dog, a cat, a gerbil, whatever, and it takes ill, that vet will make house calls. Coming up next on our right, a building with several hundred windows. Skidmore, Owings and Merrill Architects. When this building was built, it had no windows at all. It was called the Apparel Mart in the city of Chicago. And people in the clothing trade did not want light coming in. They felt it would damage fabrics and cause colors to fade. When the Apparel Mart people vacated, the architects returned with their lasers and computers and put in several hundred windows. On your left, 4 townhomes by Harry Weiss, the architect. They're very interesting buildings. Remember, he was a sailor. I'll have more to say about these on our way back. Coming up on your right is the East Bank Club of Chicago, a social and athletic facility. Opened up in 1980. The architect, a gentleman named Daniel Levin. Now, we are actually looking at the back of the building. Why would you have built facing away from the river? Because for most of its history, this branch of the river was considered to be one of the most toxic waterways in the United States. It's been cleaned up quite a bit. We get a lot of canoeists out here, kayakers out here, people fish here. I wouldn't put my hands in the water, it's still pretty polluted. So they built facing away. This club has a membership of about 3,000 of the most powerful and beautiful people in Chicago, and those who would like to be powerful and beautiful. It's open 18 hours a day. Drive your car in the morning, and while you exercise, swim, work on your golf swing, shoot baskets, pump iron, it has 3 restaurants, 4 shops to shop in, and your car could have its tires rotated, greased, oiled, and lubed while you're working out. When that building opened up in 1980, it led to a resurgence of this north branch of the river, which was dominated by factories and warehouses. Several things happened. Number one, we took an older building like this one from the first decade of the 20th century. It had been a Baltimore and Ohio railroad warehouse. When they moved out, developers moved in. They kept the 14-foot high ceilings and added those metal balconies. When you see an older building with balconies like that attached to it, it's a dead giveaway in Chicago, probably other cities as well. It means yuppies have taken over this neighborhood. You get a 1-bedroom for about $300,000. Which has what's called a princess of a kitchen. That means you can barely turn around in it. Then if you want to park your car in this garage, added in the 1990s, that's about $250 to $300 a month. Considered reasonable for this area. Then we have a series of new buildings in this area. The first one on our right here is an apartment building designed by a British-born architect, John Cordwell. Mr. Cordwell, a native of Leicestershire, England, was a prisoner of war in the Second World War. He was in prison in what was known as Stalag or Camp 17. When he got out, he studied architecture, came to the United States, and became a very prominent architect. Then this area here, this is called Aaron Montgomery Ward Park. And the white building with the horizontal white and the white steel chevrons, designed by a French architect, Lucien Lagrange. The building straight back, with the clear and opaque windows, the concrete on either end. That building designed in 1974 by Minoru Yamasaki. Mr. Yamasaki was the architect of the original World Trade Center in New York. Now that building was the headquarters of Montgomery Ward Company. Montgomery Ward, or Monkey Wards as people called it, started in Chicago in the 1880s with a one-page flyer selling to people in rural parts of the area. Anyhow, they lasted until the beginning of the 21st century when they fell victim to changing consumer tastes, e.g. the internet, and a management that has been described as notoriously inept. Now, most of the people that live in this area between 25 and 45 years. One day we were out here and we counted 28 different breeds of canines. It's like being at the Westminster Kennel Club show. Now, Montgomery Ward's had a huge presence in this area. Chicago was the catalog center of the world. Headquartered here, we had Sears Roebuck and Company, Spiegel, Montgomery Ward's. This building on your right was a Ward's administration building built in the 1920s in the Art Deco style. When developers Papa George and Haynes took it over, they cut out the lowest level to provide a public walkway. They added those Art Deco balconies and window trims. And today it's a condominium building called Riverside Place. If you lived here and you worked in our center city, you're 10 minutes away by public transit. You could bicycle it in 20, and you could walk in probably a half hour. Coming up next on your right, the Montgomery Ward Warehouse Building. A huge building in the prairie style. Today it's commercial and condominium. The largest commercial tenant, look up to your right, Groupon. They're headquartered in this building. The other large commercial tenant that I'm aware of is the Dyson Corporation, makers of vacuum cleaners, hair dryers, and much more. This is the North and South American headquarters. The architectural style is known as Prairie style. Prairie style architecture, often associated with Frank Lloyd Wright, though he had nothing to do with this building. This building's from 1907. Is characterized by long horizontals, short verticals, and some decoration. Carolyn, kick on the heater. Would you do me a favor? Hey, how are those home-baked Costco cookies? Pretty good? Okay. Great. So, let me try to give you some quick history of this area. There's no one here except Native Americans until the year 1673. In that year, two Frenchmen, a Catholic priest, Père Marquette, and a explorer by the name of Louis Joliet came through here, claimed all of this region for the Empire of France. The French owned it, though they didn't do anything here, and then the French go to war with England in 1754. It's called the 7 Years' War for Empire, French, and Indian War. England wins. This becomes part of the British colonial empire. Then that nasty King George III and his advisors said the folks in the colonies should pay for the cost of that war. You know what our relatives in Boston did? They dumped the tea in the harbor. Result, the Revolutionary War. When that war ends, this is the Western Front. In 1803, when Fort Dearborn was built at Michigan and Waco, this is the westernmost settlement of the young United States. Okay, on your right here, folks, is a building without windows, designed by Skidmore, Owings, and Merrill. This is the home to the Chicago Tribune. It's where they're printed. The Midwest editions of the Wall Street Journal, Financial Times, Investors Daily, several foreign language newspapers, and the name of this building, proper name, is the Freedom Center. Look at it. It looks more like a maximum security institution or a Russian gulag. There are no windows. Why? Well, the Tribune didn't want light coming in. They felt it would damage the quality of the newsprint. They could crank out each press in there 10,000 newspapers an hour, but they don't do it anymore because people don't read newspapers the way they used to. And they didn't want their employees looking out on the river, listening to someone like Ed chattering away. You come back here in about 5 years, this will probably be gone. There's plans afoot for a tremendous high-rise townhome and commercial development in this immediate area. Okay, so 1803, we built Fort Dearborn here. There's about 300 people living here. We become a village in 1833, a city in 1837, and then we start to get overseas immigration. Ireland has a potato famine in the 1840s. 1/3 of the population of the Emerald Isle will hop across the pond, up to cities like Chicago, New York, Cleveland, Boston, and so on. 1/3 will perish, starve to death, and 1/3 stays behind. Folks, if you're ever here on the 17th of March, very interesting. I've been in Dublin. Not a heck of a lot to do in Dublin. Go to church and drink. Here we do that, but we dye parts of this river Kelly green, biodegradable vegetable dye for the environmentalists. And we have parades. When I was a kid growing up here, we thought St. Patrick's Day was a national holiday. All the public schools were closed. City Hall was closed. The county building was closed. Now to take off, you have to use a sick day, a vacation day, or a mental health day, etc. Then in the 1840s, we started to get a lot of Germans coming here. There was a revolution in Germany, and the losing side said, we better get out of here. So they came and brought with them the symphony, the kindergarten, the schnitzel, and their beer. So, the worst law ever passed in the history of this country was called prohibition. You could not drink, manufacture, or distill alcoholic beverages above 1%. From 1919 to 1933. It had no chance in a city like Chicago. Not when you had so many people of Irish descent, German descent, Poles, Lithuanians, Latvians, Estonians, Italians who needed their red wine as well as their Peroni beer. Okay, coming up on your right, folks, townhomes on the Chicago River by Papa George and Haynes. There's 70 townhomes here. They're in the federal style, so if you went to East Coast cities from Rhode Island down to South Carolina, you find architecture resembling this along the waterfronts. These are 4 stories high, rooftop decks, elevators. The columns in front are known as Doric, D-O-R-I-C. That is the simplest form of Greek architectural column. Doric would be followed by Ionic, and then the most sophisticated called Corinthian. It's the one with all the leaves and that at the top of the column. Now, when plans for these 70 townhomes were announced in 1994, all 70 went under contract in 3 weekends, only from architects' renderings, $400,000 each. Today, they go for $1.5 million or so. And it's a closed or gated community. Public walkway on the outside, but to gain access to the interior, where there are more townhomes and apartment buildings, you need a key or a fob to get in there. Okay. Coming up next on our right are the townhomes of Harry Weiss, built at a cost of about $450,000 in the 1980s. The end walls are all triangular shaped like sails on a ship. Round windows, twisted staircases, 6 stories high. One sold last summer for $2.4 million. Not everybody's cup of tea, perhaps, but very unusual. Now, the next building on your right here, this is called the Fulton House. Built in 1906 as a cold storage warehouse. When the architects decided to turn it into offices and condominiums, and it took 2 years for the building to defrost. 4 feet of horsehair insulation between the outer wall and the inner wall. Coming up next on our right, townhomes and condominium apartments by an architect named James DeStefano and Associates. 6 3-story townhomes at ground level, 6 levels of parking. You cannot park your own car. Valet parking only. Turns are too narrow. I don't care if you're Al Unser, Cale Yarborough, Danica Patrick, or anybody. And all the windows in the condominium, every single one, faces to your left. They face east. Why no windows facing west? When that building went up, there were a lot of factories back there. They've all disappeared, replaced by high-rises. Okay, we're approaching this curved building, which has an arc in front that pays homage to the railroad heritage of Chicago. But notice, the curve in this new building sort of complements the curve in the 333 West Wacker building on the other side of the river. Some of our guides have said they've been out here late at night and they've seen both buildings leave their moorings, come out on the river, and start spooning with each other. If you don't know what the word spoon means, you'll have to Google it. Okay, we're going to work your left-hand side now as we go up the main branch and head for home. First coming up is the Merchandise Mart, or 1871 Center in Chicago. This building was designed by the estate of Marshall Field and Company. They were a premier department store. Now they're part of Macy's. The architect's the firm of Graham, Anderson, Probst, and White. It's an Art Deco building, folks. Long, narrow verticals, indentation, decoration at the top and the bottom. Built at a cost of $34 million. When it opened up in the early 1930s, that was a terrible time. We were in the Depression. Then we had World War II. So the building is never more than 45% occupied. The Marshall Field estate puts it up for sale. In 1946, it is purchased by Joseph Kennedy of Boston for $12 million. The Kennedys kept it until 1998, when they sold it to a real estate investment trust for $680 million. Pretty good profit, even if you have to pay some taxes. Those heads on pillars facing the building, the managers of Chicago sports teams that have never won anything. We need a lot more heads. They're actually important merchants in Chicago, with 2 exceptions. So you've got Charles Walgreen, the drug man. He started here in Chicago. Cyrus McCormick, the inventor of the Reaper. Marshall Field. Julius Rosenwald, who put Sears on the map. Montgomery Wards. The 2 non-Chicagoans, John Wanamaker of Philadelphia and Edward Filene of the Filene stores in Boston, long gone. That building had its own zip code until about a half a dozen years ago. Okay, the next building on our left here, where it says Chicago Cut Steakhouse, glass, aluminum, and steel, designed by a firm from New Haven, Connecticut, Pickard and Children. By the way, that's a good steakhouse. We have a lot of them in Chicago. If you eat there, make sure you get a table facing the river. But the building has a green roof, and we have beehives up there. And the honey is harvested several times each year, and it's sold at various markets throughout the city. The next building on our right here is called the Reed Murdoch Building from 1912. George Nimmons, architect. The building was designed for wholesale grocers. Boats could pull up on the water, load and unload merchandise. There are railroad tracks on the other side. That tall center column, which says Britannia and Whirlpool, both are headquartered in the city of Chicago. There is a water tank underneath that clock. Is there any water in there? I don't have the foggiest. But many tall buildings did have water tanks for fire suppression. Coming up next on your left, a building designed by an architect named Walter Netsch Jr. Any attorneys here? Even when they're here, they won't raise their hand. This is the home of the American Bar Association. Mr. Netsch designed the Air Force Academy Chapel in Colorado Springs, Colorado. Okay, coming up on our left, the Corn Cobs of Chicago, Marina City, the 1960s. designed by Bertrand Goldberg, the same man that did River City. There are two towers here, folks. It's a condominium building now. Originally, it was a rental building. At water level, you can rent a boat, repair a boat, buy a boat, sell a boat. Various places to eat and drink. 18 floors of parking in each tower, and then several hundred condominium apartments. Ferris Bueller's dad lived here in the Ferris Bueller movie. The building appears in a lot of movies. Opening scenes of Chicago PD, Chicago Fire, like this building a lot. The building is home to a very famous Chicago couple, Jim and Lynn Niels. Just Google them, you'll see what I'm talking about. Okay, so that architect, Bertrand Goldberg, he's the student of Mies van der Rohe. Mr. Ed finds this to be very interesting. The very next building on your left, today it's the American Medical Association headquarters, was the old IBM building, the last building to be designed by Mies van der Rohe before Mies dies. So you've got the master and the student right next to each other. Mies dies in 1980. Today, as I said, it's the home to the American Medical Association. Think of that. Lawyers and doctors within one block of each other. Maybe some of us a little nervous. Okay, now we've got Trump Tower. The architect Adrian Smith, 92 stories high, tallest building in the world with a concrete foundation. At the lower level, retail, they've never rented a single store. It's not very conducive to retail. Then the building has a hotel, a garage, and condominium units. The penthouse apartment originally sold for $30 million. The most recent sale on the 87th floor of half the floor was for $10 million. It's a beautiful building, designed by a great architect. But Mr. Trump was afraid people would not recognize him. Put his name up there, 20-foot high letters. Very controversial. The mayor, the aldermen have asked him to remove it. But Donald twittered them and told them don't fly a kite. He said that sign will become as beloved as the words Hollywood above the hills of Los Angeles. No comment. We don't get into politics and religion. Okay, on your left, that's the Wrigley Building in Chicago. 1921, 1924. Graham Anderson, Probst and White. First air-conditioned office building in the world, patterned after buildings in Seville, Spain. Now we have two interesting buildings coming up here on your left. The shorter one, with that very thin roof, that is the new Apple Center in Chicago. It resembles very much the Apple Center in Cupertino, California. It's supposed to be a laptop computer with the lid down. Right behind it, from the 1920s, a French Gothic building called the Tribune Tower. If you visit that building, you'll see pieces of rock embedded at the lower level from all over the world. The owner of the Tribune, Colonel Robert McCormick, encouraged his foreign reporters to swipe a piece of rock and bring it back. So you'll find Westminster Abbey, Angkor Wat, the Alamo, the Moon Rock, whatever. Okay, next on your left, my alma mater, the University of Chicago Graduate School of Business. Those are classrooms on the west wall with no windows. The architect, Helmut Jahn. How could you have classrooms without windows? It's the University of Chicago. It's kind of a different place. When those business school professors said, no windows, we don't want our students looking at the river, and we don't want them listening to Ed. He was a social science major. They got their way. But look at their offices, floor-to-ceiling windows. The U of C, by the way, its faculty have received more Nobel Prizes than any university in the entire world. Next on your left, this is NBC Tower in Chicago. 1980s, Adrian Smith, architect. It's an Art Deco building, but modern Art Deco. Now, Adrian Smith does this in 86, the Trump Tower in 2009. He's the architect of the Burj Khalifa in Dubai, in the Middle East, which currently is the tallest structure in the entire world. But he's working on a building in Saudi Arabia, scheduled to be 34 In the Capone era, that noise you heard, we call that the Chicago typewriter. On your left here, this is the Sheraton Chicago Hotel, John Cordwell architect. The top 3 floors, 10-inch thick bulletproof glass. It's where presidents and heads of state stay when they come to Chicago. It has 1,500 rooms. And the ballroom, the main ballroom, when it's completely opened up, 42,000 square feet. You could dance all night. You won't see anybody else. If someone steps on your toe, you'll know who it was. Okay. We are on the river here, and now this river naturally flowed into Lake Michigan. That's where we get our drinking water. In the 19th century, the banks of the river were filled with factories, industry. We dumped all of our pollutants right into this river, which flowed into the lake. We had flavored water here, folks, before Evian ever thought of the idea. We also had every epidemic imaginable. So in the 1880s, the United States Army Corps of Engineers said, we are going to undertake a project to reverse the course of this river. They spent 20 years channeling the river bottom. They would remove twice as much dirt, sand, garbage, and junk as would be removed in the building of the Great Panama Canal. And when it was completed, the river was 8 to 10 feet lower than the lake. And by direct gravity feed, the river actually flowed backwards, as it does today. All of our garbage behind the boat, down that south branch we were on, into the Illinois, into the mighty Mississippi, where it flowed slowly past St. Louis, down to New Orleans. Those folks were not happy. They filed suit all the way to the United States Supreme Court. I don't know who those 9 men in their black robes were then, but they decided not to hear the case. People in St. Louis were really upset. They went to see a man named Bush. He said, I've got an idea. We can take that dirty brown water. We can put it into brown tinted bottles. We'll send it back to those folks in Chicago. We'll put a label on there, Budweiser. Never quite happened that way. But the St. Louis Cardinals beat the Cubs pretty regularly until 2 years ago. You know, we're very boastful now. We finally won after 100 years or so. Okay, directly in front of us is Lake Michigan. And by the way, Lake Michigan's pretty big. It's 370 miles long, 110 miles across to the state of Michigan. The depth's 400 feet in the north up in Wisconsin. We're at the shallow end, about 30 to 40 feet deep. The fish that we have in Lake Michigan, coho salmon, brown trout, rainbow trout, perch. We don't have any bass. You have to go to Lake Erie for that. And we do swim in the lake, by the way, in July and August and September. Right now it's just a mite chilly. Then off to your left, that's Chicago's Navy Pier, the most popular tourist site in the state of Illinois. Navy Pier opened up in 1916 as a warehouse. It's 7/8 of a mile long. It's a pretty good hike from the west end to the east end. As a warehouse to relieve crowding on the branches of the Chicago River. In 1940, the United States Navy took control of Navy Pier. They closed it to civilians. The Navy took 2 ships that carried passengers, turned them into makeshift aircraft carriers. We had a Naval Air Combat Training Station about 30 miles north of Chicago called the Glenview Naval Air Training Station. And during World War II, almost 5,000 pilots, combat pilots, trained there. They would fly down here and they would do landings and takeoffs on makeshift aircraft carriers. 18 men would lose their lives in training incidences. They're on a plaque at the east end of the pier, their names. The most famous pilot to have trained here probably was former President George Bush, trained here. And the late nighttime talk show host, a fellow by the name of Johnny Carson, he had a sidekick, Ed McMahon. Ed was a Marine naval aviator who also trained here. Okay, after World War II, Navy Pier became a 2-year branch of the University of Illinois at Chicago. Then in the 1980s, it began to take on what it is today. Souvenir shops, restaurants, Shakespeare Theater, IMAX Theater, Children's Museum, conventions are held here, trade shows, and several carnival-related rides, including the Ferris wheel. Now that Ferris wheel that you see, it's worth taking a ride on. It's 200 feet high. All the cabins are air conditioned, and today they're heated. It's very warm in there, I guarantee. And they have piped in music. One ride is 3 complete revolutions. Now, why the Ferris wheel? Well, the very first Ferris wheel in the entire world was here in Chicago, built for the 1893 World Fair. That was the fair that put Chicago on the map, because we had burned to the ground 20 years before. So when the U.S. Congress said we're going to hold a World Fair to honor Christopher Columbus's coming into the New World, Chicago competes with Philadelphia, Boston, and other cities. Congress awards it to Chicago. And that's where we get our nickname, the Windy City. We're called the Windy City because, as you've lived it and experienced it today, when the wind comes in off of Lake Michigan, it's cold here. New York newspapers said those windbags from Chicago out-talked and outspent our windbags to get the World Fair. So that's where the term the Windy City really comes from. The third reason, Mr. Ed, I love to talk. I could never handle solitary confinement. Okay, so the first Ferris wheel in the world was in Jackson Park, where the Museum of Science and Industry is located. University of Chicago. That was the site of the World's Fair. If you haven't read a book by Eric Larson called The Devil in the White City, you should consider reading it. You won't put it down until you finish that book. Okay, so we've got the Ferris wheel out here, many other. It's a 5-minute walk from our dock, by the way. You don't even have to go on the water. It's all on dry land. And a lot of people like to come over here after our cruises or before our cruises or whatever. Anyhow, we're heading back to port. Oh yeah, those are dinner cruise. Well, breakfast, lunch, and dinner cruise ships. No, there are 3 or 4 companies that, there are 5 companies that work the river, and some own those boats over there. And we go in the water usually the week after St. Patty's Day, and we come out of the water the first week in December. Now, the reason why we stay in that long, the North American Radiological Society holds their annual convention here in Chicago. About 40,000 people affiliated with radiology and so on come here. And all the boat companies like to get their last monies before they pack it up for the season. Now, we guides, none of us want to work. We try to come up with all these excuses. Most of us are retired. Oh, my mother won't let me out. I can't go, this, that, and the other thing. I lost my long underwear or whatever. But we generally come out of the water that first week in December. Anyhow, I don't know what your plans are while you're here on the remainder of your time in Chicago. We have some tremendous museums. The Art Institute of Chicago, for example, has the second greatest collection of French Impressionist art in the entire world. Only the Louvre in Paris exceeds the depth and breadth of the collection. Then we have the Museum of Contemporary Art, which is contemporary art. You either will understand it or you say, what am I doing? At the Field Museum of Natural History, that's where we have Sue, the most complete T-Rex dinosaur ever discovered by a paleontologist named Sue Wilkinson. She's going to be moving from her first floor location up to the second floor because paleontologists from that museum 2 years ago in Argentina discovered the remains of a larger dinosaur. The Field Museum also has all the Egyptian mummies that are not in the British Museum or in the Cairo Museum. The Museum of Science and Industry has the U-505, the only German U-boat captured intact in World War II. It has an operating coal mine. Most popular exhibit in that museum, by the way, a chicken hatchery. Since 1955. People will stand there for hours waiting for someone to peck their way out of one of those little eggs. And of course we have great restaurants, but no one should leave Chicago without trying our deep dish thick crust pizza or a true Chicago hot dog. Let me describe it for you. A steamed, you got it, steamed poppy seed bun, all beef, no pork, no veal, no filler. Yellow salad mustard, neon green pickle relish, chopped onion, a pickle spear, 2 half moons of tomato, a little sport pepper tucked in either end, but no ketchup. I have an 11-year-old grandson. That's all he does. He puts ketchup on. I've worked with him for 2 years. He hasn't budged. It is embarrassing. I'm worried about that kid. I'm going to have to have his DNA tested. But anyhow, we ask you to just hang in there a couple seconds more. We know you're chilly. We have to have our boat tied up. Open the gates. I'll be the first one off to answer any questions that you may have. Say thank you to you. You're more than welcome to go back inside. Have a cup of hot tea or whatever. Nice warm restrooms and so on. And thank you for coming.